The most anticipated poll ahead of the Iowa caucus was scrapped this weekend. So we're looking at some other polling from Emerson and CBS, which is also good,
it's
reputable
fine.
outlets. It's fine. Yeah.
Team Rising is here. Michael Starr Hopkins, he's a Democratic strategist, and Emily Jashinsky, she's a culture editor at The Federalist. Two great friends of the show. I'm glad to have you guys here on Caucus Day. So we've got we have some polls.
Yes.
I'd say rather than put up Emerson and all that others, we have CBS that generally had Biden and Sanders that were tied in the early battleground straights. But let's look at 538. And we're going to look at the averages there. Bernie Sanders, number 1, Biden, number 2, Buttigieg, 3. Do you think that holds up, Michael, or are we in for a little bit of a change tonight? What do you think?
I think there's a little shuffle. I think it's going to go Sanders, Buttigieg, and Biden. And I think that's purely just based on turnout and momentum. At the end of the week, you always look to see where the momentum is, who's carrying it. And I think Buttigieg, with his support in rural and in kind of the college areas, is going to be really good for him. Same with Sanders. And I think Biden's just kind of trailing off.
Yeah.
What do you think, Emily?
Well, I think that's a good point about especially colleges for Buttigieg. That's something to watch. A lot of schools in Iowa, a lot of young voters. What's interesting also, though, is that a lot of these polling is showing the bunch between Biden and Sanders is really close. I mean, pretty much every poll is showing that. And so what you have to look at in that case is momentum, and that is certainly with Bernie. But one caveat to that is the way the caucus process works. We're going to have to look for where those Klobuchar voters are breaking. We're going to have to look for where those Tulsi voters are breaking. We're going to have all those people that are at sort of those. That adds up to a significant number.
Absolutely.
And which direction they're breaking in will make a big difference.
And nobody has control over that. You know, Andrew Yang was actually on ABC this weekend. They asked him, they're like, oh, do you think all your people? He said, yeah, some of them will go to Bernie. He said, a lot of them will just leave. They're former Trump voters.
Yeah.
And so
Tulsi, same deal. And she's not playing as hard in Iowa nearly as Andrew is.
Right.
But those things become significant. I mean, we've got the Real Clear Politics average up, which is very similar, but shows Bernie with about a 4-point edge over Biden. And then you've got Pete and Warren both right around that 15 percentage point mark. Amy Klobuchar. One of the trends that's emerged over the past several weeks is that Amy has seen a little bit of bump in support. She had a big event over the weekend, her biggest yet. She had about 700 people there, which is her largest crowd to date. So, you know, there are going to be caucus sites where Warren is under the viability threshold, where Pete is under the threshold, where Biden is under the threshold, and many where Amy is under the threshold. That's a lot of voters that are up for grabs and just makes it incredibly hard to predict.
It makes it so hard to predict because you don't know especially who's going to break for Biden, the safe choice.
Yes.
And then there's a lot of candidates that look like they could go to Bernie, which kind of just edges their voters could go to Bernie, which just kind of brings us back to where we are.
Right.
Yeah, and so let me ask you this, Michael, because Crystal and I are both of the mind that Biden's support here is actually it seems inflated to the point because he's got a terrible organizational game, right? That's what we've heard, is that Warren and Buttigieg have excellent ones. They've actually had the ability to drive out crowds. And look, I know crowd sizes aren't everything, but it's something. Bernie's got 3,000 people in one of his closing rallies. Buttigieg had 2,000. I'm not sure what Warren has. Biden had his biggest crowd of the event last night. It was only at 1,000 people. I mean, how can you place second whenever that's what you're putting up? Do we expect him to come in winnowing behind some of the others? What do you think?
I do, and I think when you look at the crowds for Biden, it's kind of baked in. People aren't excited about Biden, but they think he can win, so they're backing him. It looks very reminiscent to Hillary in 2016.
Yeah.
And as we were talking about off air, I think the big number we should all look at is 300,000.
Yes.
If for caucuses, it's usually about 250,000 people that turn out. If we get over 300,000, that means it's a record turnout, and I think that really helps Sanders.
Well, Michael, you were saying you were listening to all of their closing pitches this weekend, doing the Lord's work so that we don't have to do that. Thank you for taking that for us. What did you make of their final arguments?
I mean, I think Sanders and Buttigieg are very much making the change argument that, you know, we're heading into a new generation. We need fundamental change. The system is unfair. Whereas Biden is kind of making this weird argument that we can reach across the aisle and kumbaya and not really pushing back against Trump. And Warren is kind of flailing around, kind of talking about women can win, but also let's get into the very minutia details of policy. And it doesn't have the same kind of resonance.
Pink cat presidency is what she wants to be. But, you know, and that's the thing. I mean, we're just looking at this, Emily, and I saw that Joe Biden was on NBC this morning. He basically said, voting for me is like voting for a third term of Barack Obama.
Yeah.
It's amazing that he's actually doing it. I mean, country rejected that in 2016. He put it all on the line for Hillary Clinton, and it didn't happen.
Well, it's funny because you're saying Joe Biden is making sort of this weird convoluted argument, but Joe Biden thinks he's the argument in and of itself.
Yes.
Right? And there are a lot of older white voters in Iowa, and what we've seen in polling is that their number one priority is beating Donald Trump. And maybe you're not going to show out to you're not going to come out to a rally if that's your priority, but you'll show up at the caucus night because you really want to beat Donald Trump, and you'll go with Biden because the argument is that he's the safe choice. He's going to beat Donald Trump, as opposed to, self-identified Democratic Socialist or gay mayor from South Bend, Indiana.
His ads are very good to that effect. They say, vote Biden, beat Trump. That's literally it.
I mean, he has definitely hammered home that message, but I think as he's looked sort of a bit weak on the trail, a bit fragile. It hasn't really come together. I mean, Michael, one of the things that has occurred to me is it's always been posited that Sanders has this hard ceiling of support. Like, yes, his people are really with him, but it's just this small group of people. That seems not to be the case. As people have been making their final decision, they've been disproportionately going to Bernie. It looks more like Biden, maybe the one who had the hard ceiling of support where, yes, his people are with him, but he's not really shown an ability to grow the pie. We previewed a poll from South Carolina, a poll that he at one point was winning by 31 points. Yeah. Now his edge is down to just 5.
Yeah.
Well, and if you listen to what Sanders is saying in his speeches now, he's gone from just talking to his base and his supporters to now saying, even if you don't agree with my policies, know that my heart's in the right place and that we're going to do this together. And I think that's kind of something that's resonated with, people who voted for Trump, people who may support Biden but just want to beat Trump.
Right.
His message has gone more populist in more kind of Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania than it has before. And I think that's working.
It's very much kind of like an Obama 2008 thing. Another thing I've been thinking about, Emily, is about the parallels with Trump. Is that, with Trump, everybody said the same thing. Ceiling, ceiling, ceiling. Oh, Iowa just 23%. Oh, New Hampshire just like 33%. Measly 30. But then what ended up happening is goes to Nevada, he wins like 52% of the vote.
Right.
Is that everybody said he had a ceiling when actually, what happened is he proved his viability, and then dramatic amounts of voters started to switch over to him. So, I mean, do you think that's the same case with Sanders?
That's a really interesting point. Yeah. Like heading into Super Tuesday, some of those states in the lead up to that, and then Super Tuesday itself, so huge, even if you're losing or not doing as well in Iowa or New Hampshire as you would like to. I do agree that it's always looked like Biden has had a ceiling. And we were talking about that on this show like months ago. He wasn't inching up past a certain point in the polls. That said, I think this could go either way. I think that sort of pattern could happen for both Biden and Sanders. If Biden is so strong in South Carolina, or just solid, not as strong as maybe it looked like he once was, but just solid in South Carolina, momentum builds, and we don't have this weird situation where we're going into the convention in July not knowing what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I think a lot depends on what happens tonight. We're going to get into next for whom this is a must win and who can afford to take a loss tonight. That right after this break.